You already know what you're capable of. That's what makes it worse. It's not a vague suspicion. It's not insecurity dressed up as humility. It's something you feel in specific moments. When you see someone doing what you know you could do, when a conversation reveals exactly the kind of thinking you're capable of, but never seem to apply, when you're alone, and the distance between who you are and who you could be becomes impossible to ignore. You know it's there. The intelligence, the talent, the vision, whatever word fits. And the fact that it keeps going unrealized doesn't confuse you anymore. It haunts you, because you've tried the obvious things. More discipline, more structure, more information, more intention. You've read the books, absorbed the frameworks, made the plans, and still, something doesn't move, not fully, not the way it should. The assumption underneath all of that effort is the one that's killing you. You believe the gap between what you are and what you could be is a gap of addition, that if you could just acquire enough of the right things, the potential would finally unlock. More willpower, more knowledge. One more strategy. You keep reaching outward, adding more weight to a structure that doesn't need more. It needs demolition. Carl Jung spent decades tracing the architecture of what stops people from becoming who they actually are. He called this process individuation, not self-improvement, not optimization, but the slow and often brutal emergence of the self that was always there, buried under what you built to survive. And what he found, consistently, was not that people lacked what they needed. He found that they were imprisoned by what they refused to destroy. The structures you built early, the masks, the ideals, the loyalties, the narratives, made sense once. They were protection. They helped you belong, stay safe, avoid pain. But protection, left in place long enough, becomes a cage. And a cage doesn't feel like a cage when you've been inside it long enough to call it home. This video is about 7 of those structures, not weaknesses to fix, not habits to improve. Psychological constructions, some of them invisible, all of them load-bearing, that you will need to kill deliberately if you want what's already inside you to finally surface, not weaken, not manage, kill. What Jung understood, and what most of psychology has spent decades softening, is that the self doesn't emerge gradually. It erupts, but only after the structures blocking it have been dismantled with intention. The question is whether you're willing to be the one who does it. Most people never question whether the person they show the world is actually them. They just keep performing. The persona, in Jung's framework, is not the enemy. Every functioning adult wears masks. The professional face, the family role, the public identity. These are necessary. Society runs on them. The problem is not that you have a persona. The problem is that somewhere along the way, you forgot you were wearing one. When the mask fuses with the face, something quietly catastrophic happens. You stop living from the inside out and start living from the outside in. Your choices are no longer driven by what you actually want, think, or feel. They're driven by what the mask requires. And the mask requires consistency. It requires maintenance. It requires an audience. Think about what that costs you. Every opinion you swallow because it doesn't match the image. Every desire you suppress because it would confuse people who think they know you. Every version of yourself you've never expressed because the role you play has no room for it. You've been editing yourself for so long that you've lost track of what the original draft even looked like. The tell is exhaustion, not the tiredness that comes from hard work, the specific, grinding fatigue of performance, of waking up and immediately calculating who you need to be today, of spending energy not on creating or building or thinking, but on managing perception. If that exhaustion sounds familiar, it's because you've been working 2 jobs for years, the one everyone sees and the one no one knows about, the constant labor of keeping the mask in place. Jung was precise about this. He wrote that people who identify completely with their persona live a life that belongs to everyone but themselves. The approval they seek is real. The relationships they build are real. But the self doing the seeking and the building is artificial. A carefully constructed character who has learned to want what it's supposed to want. Here's what killing the inflated persona actually demands. Not authenticity as performance, not trading one mask for the mask of radical honesty. It demands something harder. Spending time without an audience and asking, with genuine uncertainty, who is still there. What do you think when no one's opinion is at stake? What do you want when there's no one to impress or reassure? What have you been calling not really my thing, that is, in fact, very much your thing, just inconvenient for the image? Act against the persona in small, deliberate ways. Express an opinion that the role wouldn't approve of. Show a vulnerability the mask has always hidden. Refuse a version of yourself that people expect, not as rebellion, as experiment. You are testing whether you exist outside the performance. You do, but you've buried that person under years of applause. And what you'll find underneath the persona is something the mask was specifically designed to hide. An image of who you were always supposed to become, impossibly perfect, endlessly demanding. That image has been running you from the shadows. In the next part, we kill it. Quick announcement. The Psyphoria newsletter is live. Every Monday, you'll receive one idea from depth psychology, alongside a classical painting chosen for the week and a simple practice to carry into your days. It's completely free. Access psyphoria.net or check the pinned comment. Perfectionism is not high standards. It is a war you declared against yourself and have been losing ever since. Somewhere inside you lives an image, not a goal, not an aspiration, an image, a fully formed picture of the person you were supposed to become, more disciplined than you are, more consistent, more successful by now, further along. This image didn't appear from nowhere. It was assembled from what your parents rewarded, from who you compared yourself to, from the standards your environment taught you to internalize as your own. And it has been sitting in judgment over everything you do, every day, without your conscious permission. This is what Jung identified as the tyranny of the ideal, the internal figure that doesn't motivate you toward growth, but condemns you for failing to already be there. The distinction matters enormously. A genuine aspiration pulls you forward. The idealized image holds you in contempt. One produces movement. The other produces shame. And shame, at sufficient intensity, produces paralysis. Not the dramatic kind, the quiet kind. The kind where you don't start the project because you can already see it won't be what it should be. Where you don't make the call because you'll probably handle it wrong. Where you spend years preparing to be ready instead of being someone who acts and adjusts. The idealized image doesn't push you to perform better. It ensures you perform less, because the gap between who you are and who you should be is so vast and so permanent that action starts to feel pointless. Here is the thing. No one tells you about that image. It is not yours. It was never yours. It is a composite of other people's expectations, other people's definitions of success, other people's anxieties transferred onto you before you were old enough to refuse them. You have been torturing yourself with a standard that wasn't built for you, that wasn't built by you, and calling that torture motivation. Killing this image requires something more uncomfortable than self-compassion slogans. It requires you to look directly at the ideal and ask where it came from. Whose voice does it speak in? What specific failure does it keep returning to? What version of success does it demand? And does that version have anything to do with what you actually want from your life? Or does it belong to someone else entirely? Then you declare it dead, not weakened, not revised into something more reasonable. Dead. You are not the person in that image. You are not a failed version of that person. You are a different person entirely. One who can only move from where they actually stand. not from where the image says they should already be. The energy that has been hemorrhaging into shame, comparison, and the performance of self-improvement returns the moment you stop feeding the ideal. It doesn't come back as comfort. It comes back as velocity, the specific forward momentum of someone who has stopped arguing with a ghost and started moving through real terrain. But even with the ideal destroyed, something older holds you back. A loyalty so deep you never chose it, to a version of life that was never really yours to begin with. That is what we dismantle next. The patterns you keep repeating are not yours. You inherited them. This is the one most people resist hardest, not because it's abstract, but because it implicates people they love. Jung observed something that family systems theory would spend decades elaborating: that the psyche doesn't develop in isolation. It develops inside a field, a family field, dense with unspoken rules, inherited anxieties, and invisible ceilings on how much success, happiness, or freedom any member is allowed to claim. You absorbed that field before you had language to question it. Watch the pattern carefully. You build momentum towards something real: a business, a relationship, a creative project, a level of income you've never touched. And then, at a specific threshold, something collapses. Not from outside, from inside. A decision that doesn't make sense in retrospect. A self-sabotage so clean it almost looks like bad luck. A sudden loss of desire for the very thing you said you wanted. Jung would not call this coincidence. He would call it loyalty. Unconscious, ferocious loyalty to the limits of the system that formed you. The mechanism is not complicated, but it is brutal. If your family lived with chronic financial scarcity, some part of you registers sustained prosperity as a form of abandonment, as moving so far beyond them that the thread connecting you snaps. If your parents' relationship modeled dysfunction, some part of you finds genuine intimacy destabilizing, because stability wasn't what love looked like where you learned the word. If ambition was treated as arrogance in the house you grew up in, your own ambition will keep finding reasons to apologize for itself. You swore you would be different, and you meant it. But meaning it consciously is not enough when the loyalty operates beneath consciousness, in the part of you that still belongs to that system and is still, decades later, trying not to betray it. The work here is not blame. Blame is easy and useless. The work is recognition, precise, unsentimental recognition of the specific pattern your family lived and the specific way you have been replicating it while telling yourself you were doing something else. What was the ceiling in your house? What happened to people who exceeded it? What did success, ambition, or departure cost the people you watched most closely? Then, the severance. Jung understood that the unconscious responds to symbolic action with a seriousness the rational mind can't replicate. Write it down, not as accusation, but as acknowledgement. Name what you inherited. Name the loyalty. Name what it has cost you. Then name the release. That honoring the people who formed you does not require you to replicate their constraints. That living beyond the limits of your family's script is not betrayal, but completion. The fulfillment of something they couldn't finish. Burn it. The gesture matters. The unconscious does not respond to resolutions. It responds to acts. What you'll find on the other side of that severance is not freedom, not immediately. What you'll find first is the reflex that has been masquerading as prudence your entire adult life. The need to control every variable before you move. That reflex is the next thing that has to die. Planning is not action. In most cases, it is the most sophisticated form of avoidance available to an intelligent person. The ego that demands total control before it moves is not being responsible. It is being afraid, and using the language of responsibility to make the fear sound reasonable. You tell yourself you're not ready yet, that there are still variables to account for, contingencies to map, conditions that need to be right before the real work can begin. And the planning feels productive. It feels like progress. It has the texture of effort without the exposure of actual risk. Jung was precise about what the control-seeking ego is really protecting against. Not failure, but vulnerability. The moment you act without guarantees, you become visible. The outcome is no longer theoretical. You can be judged, not for your potential, which is safely infinite as long as it remains untested, but for what you actually produced. Control is the mechanism that keeps potential hypothetical, and hypothetical potential is the only kind that can never disappoint. Notice where this lives in your life. The project that has been in planning for 2 years. The conversation you've been preparing for, but never having. The decision that keeps requiring one more piece of information before it can be made. The version of yourself you're constructing in preparation for eventually showing up, as if showing up were something that happens after you're ready, rather than the thing that makes you ready. The need for control doesn't just delay action, it degrades the quality of everything it touches. Relationships become negotiations you're trying to win. Collaborations become threats to your autonomy. Opportunities become variables you can't yet account for. The controlling mind turns life into a problem to be solved before it can be lived. And life, being fundamentally uncontrollable, never meets the conditions. What Jung pointed toward, and what the individuation process demands, is a conscious surrender. Not passivity, not indifference to outcomes. A deliberate, eyes-open decision to act before the conditions are perfect. To release the outcome after giving the effort. To influence what can be influenced and release what cannot. This is not a relaxation of standards. It is the only posture from which real work actually gets done. The practice is specific. You pick the thing you've been controlling instead of doing, and you do it. Incomplete, uncertain, exposed. You share the work before it's finished. You make the decision with the information you have. You begin the project without knowing how it ends. Not because preparation is worthless, but because at some point, preparation becomes a structure you're hiding inside, and the only way out is to act your way out. Paradoxically, the moment you release the need for total control, your actual influence expands. The energy that was locked in maintenance of an illusion becomes available for creation. The mind that was managing variables starts solving real problems. What felt like responsibility was contraction. What feels like surrender turns out to be the beginning of genuine power. But even freed from the paralysis of control, something can still hold you in place. A story you've been telling about why none of this is really your fault. That story is the next thing you have to destroy. If what you're hearing resonates with you, you'll find real value in my ebooks. Beyond the Shadow breaks down Jung's core ideas, while Dialogues with the Unconscious gives you a 30-day path to apply them in your life. Both are linked in the pinned comment. The victim narrative doesn't feel like a choice. That's what makes it so effective. It arrived honestly. Something happened. Maybe many things. Maybe things that were genuinely unjust, genuinely damaging, genuinely not your fault. The circumstances were real. The pain was real. And the story that formed around that pain made sense at the time because it was true. You were acted upon. You didn't choose what happened to you. But somewhere between what happened and right now, the story calcified. It stopped being a description of the past and became a description of you, of what you're capable of what you're owed, of why the gap between where you are and where you could be belongs to someone else's account. And that shift from "this happened to me" to "this is why I cannot" is the most expensive psychological transaction most people ever make. Jung understood that the unconscious organizes identity around whatever it repeats. Tell the story of your wound long enough, to enough people, with enough detail and emotional consistency, and the wound stops being something you experienced. it becomes something you are. The injury becomes the identity, and identity, once established, defends itself with everything the psyche has. Here is the brutal architecture of it. The victim narrative gives you something real, relief from responsibility. If the obstacle is external, the circumstances, the parents, the system, the timing, the people who failed you, then the failure to reach your potential is not a failure of will or courage or commitment. It's evidence. It proves the case. And some part of you has been building that case for years, gathering exhibits, because the alternative, accepting that you have more agency than you've been using, is far more frightening than the injustice itself. This is what Jung would not let you soften. The same move that removes blame also removes power. It is not my fault, and I cannot change it. Travel together. You do not get to keep one without the other. Every time you locate the source of your stagnation outside yourself, you simultaneously locate the solution outside yourself. And you are left waiting for external conditions to change before your life can begin. The severance is not about denying what happened. It is not toxic positivity dressed in Jungian language. What happened, happened. The injustice was real. The damage was real. None of that is being erased. What is being destroyed is the conclusion you drew from it, that because those things happened, you are exempt from the full weight of your own agency. You are not exempt. No one is. The most psychologically developed position available to you is this: yes, and yes, it was hard, and I am still the one responsible for what I do now. Yes, it was unfair, and I am still the one who has to move. That movement begins the moment the narrative shifts from explanation to starting point. Not, here is why I am where I am, but here is where I am, and here is what I do next. What you will discover, once the victim identity dissolves, is something unexpected, a terror that has nothing to do with failure, a fear of the opposite. The next structure you have to kill is the one that has been protecting you from your own potential, and it is the most paradoxical of all. Everyone understands the fear of failure. Almost no one admits the fear of success. But watch yourself carefully, not in the moments of defeat, but in the moments just before breakthrough. The project that was finally gaining real traction that you quietly let die. The opportunity that arrived at exactly the right time and that you found, to your own confusion, a reason to decline. The relationship, the partnership, the creative work that reached a threshold of genuine consequence. And something in you pulled the emergency brake. You called it timing. You called it not being ready. You found a practical explanation that was just plausible enough to believe. Jung called this the refusal of the hero. The moment when the call arrives and the psyche, instead of answering, manufactures an excuse sophisticated enough to feel like wisdom. It is not wisdom. It is the ego protecting the last thing it has left to protect. The identity of someone who has not yet fully tried. That identity is more valuable than most people realize. As long as you have not genuinely committed to your potential, the gap between who you are and who you could be remains a source of comfort rather than indictment. You are still someone with unrealized greatness ahead of you, which means you are still someone with an excuse. The moment you commit fully, the excuse dissolves. If you bring everything and it is not enough, there is nothing left to hide behind. The fear of greatness is the fear of that exposure, the final, irrevocable removal of the safety net of, I never really tried. There is more underneath it. Visibility. Living at the full height of your potential means being seen, really seen, not as a persona or a role, but as someone who chose to show up completely. That visibility invites judgment in a way that careful, strategic mediocrity never does. Mediocrity is safe because it is forgettable. Greatness is dangerous because it is a target. And some part of you has been doing the math on that trade-off for years, and choosing, quietly, to stay small. And then there is the social cost that nobody names directly. Exceeding the people around you, surpassing the friends, the family, the colleagues who form your relational world, creates a distance that feels like loss. Jung understood this as one of the deepest resistances to individuation. The fear that becoming fully yourself will mean becoming alone. That the self who emerges on the other side of full commitment will not be recognized, welcomed back, or forgiven for the departure. Killing this fear does not mean pretending it isn't there. It means naming it with precision. Not, "I'm afraid of failure," but "I am afraid of what succeeding would actually cost me, and I have been manufacturing failures to avoid finding out." That naming is the beginning of the only choice that matters. Whether you will let the fear of what greatness demands keep you from discovering what it gives. The work is not motivational. It is surgical. You locate the specific moment of sabotage, the pattern, the threshold, the recurring point at which you have historically retreated, and you do the opposite, not forever, once, deliberately. You answer the call you've been declining, and you stay in the room long enough to find out what happens next. What happens next requires one final death, the most foundational of all. Because underneath the fear of greatness is an assumption so basic you've never thought to question it, that there is a fixed self to protect in the first place. There isn't. And killing that illusion is what everything has been building toward. You have been defending a fiction, not your values, not your history, not the people you love or the experiences that formed you. Those are real. What is fiction is the belief that underneath all of that sits a fixed, permanent, essential self. A stable core identity that must be protected from change, preserved through transformation, and kept intact across every version of your life. That belief is the final prison, and it is the most subtle one because it doesn't feel like fear. It feels like integrity. Jung spent his life mapping the process he called individuation, and the insight at its center is this: the self is not a destination you reach. It is a direction you move in. It is not a noun. It is a verb. The person you were at 15 was not a younger version of who you are now. It was a different organization of the same psyche, at a different stage of an ongoing process that does not stop until you die. Every transformation you have survived has already proven this. You have already been multiple people. You just keep forgetting, because each version felt permanent while you were living inside it. The attachment to a fixed self is what makes necessary change feel like annihilation. When the transformation required is large enough, a career abandoned, an identity outgrown, a relationship that no longer fits who you are becoming, the ego reads it as death, and it responds accordingly with the full force of its survival machinery. Rationalization, delay, nostalgia, the sudden rediscovery of reasons why the old way was actually fine. The ego is not wrong that something is dying. It is wrong about whether that death is a catastrophe. What dies in genuine transformation is not you. It is the version of you that was built for conditions that no longer exist. The adaptive self, the survival self, the self that was constructed under pressure and mistaken for the real thing. Jung called what lies beneath it the self with a capital S, not the ego's preferred identity, but the deeper organizing principle of the whole psyche, the thing that has been trying to emerge through every crisis, every breakdown, every moment of inexplicable dissatisfaction with a life that looks fine from the outside. That dissatisfaction is not a malfunction. It is a signal, the self pushing against the boundaries of an identity that has become too small. And the ego's job in that moment is not to defend the boundaries. It is to dissolve them. This is the concrete thing you can do today. Not as a resolution, not as a reframe, but as a direct action. Find the single statement you make most often about who you are that functions as a limit. Not a description, a wall. I'm not someone who does X. I've never been good at Y. That's just not who I am. Take that statement and do the thing it prohibits. Once, today. Not to prove something to anyone else, but to demonstrate to your own psyche that the wall is paper, that the identity you've been treating as permanent is a habit, and habits can be broken in a single act that the rest of you then has to reckon with. Jung's entire framework rests on one unflinching premise, that the purpose of a human life is to become, as fully as possible, what you actually are, not what you were told to be, not what survival required, not the edited, approved, defended version that made it this far intact. What you actually are, which is larger, stranger, and more capable than the self you've been protecting. You don't find that by adding. You find it by having the courage to kill everything that was never really you to begin with. If something in this video unsettled you in a way you can't quite name yet, sit with that. Leave a comment with the structure that hit hardest, the one you recognized most uncomfortably in yourself. The work that started here doesn't end with this video. There's a direction this takes you, and you already feel it pulling. Follow it.